That's when they won the national championship. And that kind of brings the question. Last time Ohio State won a national championship, they got to the playoff with one loss. How does that happen again? That is the $1 billion question now for Ohio State football fans. How does Ohio State realistically get to the college football playoff with this loss? First things first, in my humble opinion, and you could comment your opinions. I'm curious to see what you guys think. He's got to win out. You got to win out. That's the only thing Ohio State has to do. They can't lose another game. If they lose another game, the season's over. They have no chance of making the playoff with 2 losses. No, not this year. You have to win the Big Ten. You have to beat Tulsa, Akron, Rutgers, Merritt. You have to win out the rest of your games. You have to win the Big Ten championship. You need help. You probably need help too. Because let's face it, in a world where Ohio State has 1 loss and potentially doesn't win the Big Ten, Penn State could scoop in and win the Big Ten potentially. That's possible. We have to see who sort of arises as the biggest challenger to the Buckeyes in the Big Ten. I think Penn State is a worthy candidate. If Iowa wins today, Iowa too. We have to think about Iowa. We have to think about Penn State as well. So certainly going to be interesting to see what happens in this Iowa State game. Because if Iowa wins, then boy, oh boy, the Hawkeyes have all the momentum going forward to win the Big Ten. That's well, here's the thing, Ryan. I think the Big Ten is strong enough for a 1-loss team to get into the playoff. But the issue that I'm thinking about is the possibility that 2 SEC teams get in. Exactly. No, I think if Iowa's undefeated and wins the Big Ten, Iowa will make the playoff. Absolutely. There's no 2 ways about that. But in a world where Ohio State has 1 loss and you have an undefeated SEC champion and a 1-loss SEC team, potentially, that could make the playoff. And you could have 2 SEC teams make the playoff. But then you have to look at the potential other teams that could get in there. Like, I'm just going to look at the rankings right now. Like, which teams are going to hop Ohio State after this loss? Oregon at 12, I would hope that the committee is smart enough to hop them pretty high after a win like this. This is a huge win for them. I would say Oregon should at least be in the top 8, at minimum top 8 after a win like this. Whether or not they hop over Cincinnati or Notre Dame is to be seen. I think Oregon's proven that they should hop over Cincinnati or Notre Dame with a win at Ohio State. It's just so difficult to win in Columbus. It's been proven. Oklahoma's going to hop over Ohio State. They're not going to lose today, I don't think. Texas A&M playing Colorado. Colorado's winning. So that's the thing. Ohio State needs help. They need teams to lose. They need A&M to probably lose a game. They need probably 2 SEC teams to lose games. Yeah, if you beat an undefeated Iowa, you could see the Buckeyes get in there. But what if Oregon goes undefeated? That to me is where things are going to get complicated. Let's say this scenario happens. Iowa's undefeated going into the Big Ten championship. Ohio State beats them. If you have Alabama, maybe Clemson, potentially, even though they have a loss, but it's to Georgia, so it's considered a good loss in a ways, because Georgia's a great team. And you're fighting for that last spot. Ohio State, 1 loss, beats Iowa in the Big Ten championship. Oregon finishes the season undefeated in the Pac-12 and wins the Pac-12 championship. I think the committee would pick Oregon because Oregon's undefeated and beat Ohio State. Even though Oregon's schedule is difficult. But that's the thing. The way after the Ducks played Fresno and barely won, I was pretty worried about Oregon. I think now I'm convinced that Fresno Bull Thomas, man, I love that. Fresno State, national champions. Fresno State's going to win the whole freaking thing. Oregon's a good loss. No, I totally agree. Oregon's a good loss. But if the final playoff spot is between an undefeated Pac-12 champion Oregon Ducks team and a 1-loss Big Ten champion Buckeyes team, I feel like the committee would pick Oregon in the scenario that those 2 teams are the 2 teams fighting for the last spot. Because let's face it, out of all the teams in the country right now, the only team that I'm fairly certain is going to make the playoff is Alabama. And then it's a toss-up between if Oklahoma potentially gets in, Clemson, another SEC team, Ohio State, or a Big Ten team like OSU, Iowa, Penn State. An Iowa win. the worst case scenario, I think, for OSU in the Iowa State game is Iowa wins. Because if Iowa loses, then at the very least, one of the best teams in the Big Ten is also sitting there with a loss on their record. No, I get it. There's no precedent. I know there's no precedent, but potentially now, with a win against Ohio State, there might be a precedent. Like, yes, Oregon doesn't really have an incredibly difficult schedule upcoming. I mean, the toughest games on their schedule right now, looking at it, at UCLA, that's a huge game for Oregon if they can stay unbeaten until October 23rd. At Utah, another big game. At Washington, obviously, a big game as well, even though Washington lost to Montana. That's tough. But that's the thing. I feel like in a situation, Oregon beats Ohio State, and Ohio State has one loss and beats. Oregon. I would pick Oregon over Ohio State too. They beat them, and that just brings up a whole even bigger conversation about the way playoff is selected and the way college football is as a whole. It's just an entire huge conversation at that point where we're getting into, the parts of the sport where it's so difficult to determine who the best team is or to determine who should get in the playoff because, these teams are playing other teams. There's not a consistent schedule, whereas in professional sports or in other sports, you see teams play each other in a whole sort of league format in a way. But man, oh man, who would have thought this would happen? But for Oregon to make the playoff, but that I think will be the interesting thing. Oregon has this win over Ohio State. Huge resume booster. If they lose, I don't know how much. If they lose any of the rest of their games, I don't know where they would stand. That's the big question. I don't know. Because until UCLA, Oregon's got Stony Brook, Arizona, Stanford, and California. I would think that those are winnable games for Oregon, especially if their top defensive guys are back. I would think that Oregon will probably be able to win those games. UCLA, again, is going to be a tough challenge. UCLA has proven to be a pretty good team. But this blows the playoff discussion wide open. Blows the discussion wide open for the playoff with the fact that OSU lose, which the other interesting thing is I can't even remember the last time that the playoff was or the expected playoff was kind of blown up in our face this early in the season. Like I know we've had early September games where top 5, top 10 teams play each other, but those teams are usually still in the conversation when we get to December. Ohio State's still going to be in the conversation, I think, come December if they win out. They lose one loss, it's over. Ohio State can't lose 2 games and expect to make the playoff.